The champagne flute was already at his lips when she said the 6 words that would save 40 people and destroy everything she'd spent 2 years hiding. Nobody in that ballroom would remember her face. That was the point. She was the girl who topped off wine glasses and cleared plates, the uniform nobody looked past to find the person wearing it. But in 11 seconds, the chandelier above the dance floor was going to come down in a sheet of fire, and only one person in the room understood why. She wasn't going to let him die not knowing. This is the story of a maid with a stolen name, a mafia boss who trusted a stranger's whisper over his own instincts, and the 6 seconds that rewired both of their lives. Stay until the end because the explosion isn't even the twist. The estate was called Bellamy House, a limestone monster of a mansion perched on 11 acres outside New Orleans, the kind of property that had its own gate code, its own private security force, and its own rules about who got to exist inside its walls and who simply worked there. Ivy Rourke had been employed there for 14 months. Ever since a woman at a diner outside Baton Rouge had slid her a business card and told her Bellamy House was always looking for staff who didn't ask questions and didn't talk to reporters. Ivy wasn't her real name. It hadn't been her real name in 2 years. She'd learned to answer to it the way you learn to answer to a nickname you didn't choose, a half-second delay, then compliance every single time someone called for her. She kept her head down, her uniform pressed, and her opinions to herself. That was the arrangement. In exchange, nobody in Bellamy House's Byzantine hierarchy of housekeepers, chauffeurs, and unmarked black cars ever asked where she'd come from or why her hands shook slightly whenever a stranger raised his voice. The man who owned Bellamy House was named Adrian Kesh, and everyone who worked there understood, without ever being told directly, that the shipping company listed on his business cards was not the reason armed men rotated through the property in 8-hour shifts. Ivy had served him coffee more mornings than she could count. He always said thank you. He never once asked her name, which suited her fine, because names were the one thing she couldn't afford to give away for free. Tonight was the Bellamy Foundation Gala, an annual masquerade that raised money for a children's hospital wing and doubled, Ivy suspected, as a discreet meeting point for men who preferred not to be photographed shaking hands in daylight. The ballroom had been transformed for the occasion, black and gold drapery, 300 rented chairs, an orchestra flown in from Atlanta, and a chandelier the size of a small car suspended 30 feet above the dance floor, dripping crystal like frozen rain. Ivy worked the floor with a tray balanced on one palm, refilling glasses, disappearing into corners, watching 200 masked guests pretend not to notice the men in dark suits stationed along the walls like furniture that happened to carry firearms. She noticed things. She always had. It was a habit she'd built out of necessity long before Bellamy House. Back when noticing the wrong thing at the wrong time in her old life had meant the difference between a quiet night and a very bad one. Tonight, that habit was about to matter more than it ever had. At 9:40, a wine cart arrived at the head table reserved for Adrian Kesh and his inner circle, delivered by a catering contractor Ivy had never seen before, working under a company badge that looked one shade too new. She watched him set 2 bottles on the linen, a 2016 Barolo for the table, and a single unmarked bottle placed beside Adrian's chair with no label at all, just a wax seal the deep red of dried blood. That detail alone would have meant nothing to almost anyone in the room. It meant everything to Ivy because 7 years ago, in a kitchen 3 states away, she had watched her father seal bottles exactly like that one. Wax the color of rust, poured thick enough to hide a needle mark beneath the cork. Her father hadn't been a criminal by choice. He'd been a pharmaceutical chemist who made one desperate mistake with a debt collector, and the men who owned that debt had spent the next 4 years using his talent for a different kind of chemistry. Ivy had grown up memorizing the smell of almonds that wasn't really almonds, the particular stillness in her father's hands whenever a shipment was due. She'd sworn she would never again stand in a room and stay silent while it happened. She'd broken that promise once already. She wasn't going to break it twice. The orchestra swelled into a slow number, couples drifting toward the dance floor, masks catching candlelight. Adrian Kesh sat at the head table in a black tuxedo with no mask at all. Men like him didn't hide their faces, they simply made sure no one dared look too long, flipping through a folder of donor pledges with the mechanical patience of a man who had already decided the evening was a formality. Beside him, 2 lieutenants argued quietly about a shipment delay. Across the room, near the terrace doors, 3 men in dark suits Ivy didn't recognize stood a little too still, watching the head table with the particular stillness of people who were timing something. At 9:58, Adrian reached for the unmarked bottle himself, waving off the pour from his usual glass, curious about the gift some anonymous donor had apparently left for him. He broke the wax seal with his thumb. He filled his own glass halfway. He lifted it toward the light the way men do when they want to look like they appreciate wine even when they don't. Ivy was 3 tables away, close enough to see his fingers close around the stem, too far to reach him in time by walking. She didn't walk. She ran the last 4 steps, tray abandoned on an empty chair, arriving at his shoulder just as the glass reached the height of his chin. "Don't drink that wine." Her voice came out as barely more than breath, pitched for his ear alone, steady in a way that surprised her even as she said it. Adrian went still. Not the theatrical stillness of a man startled by a stranger. The trained stillness of someone whose whole life had taught him that stillness was often the only thing standing between a bad moment and a fatal one. His eyes cut sideways to her without turning his head. "Say that again." "The seal. It's fresh wax over an old cork. Someone resealed that bottle after tampering with it. My father used to do it exactly that way. If you drink that, you won't feel anything for maybe 90 seconds, and then your heart is going to stop." She kept her hands folded in front of her apron, kept her spine straight, kept every ounce of panic locked somewhere beneath her collarbone where it couldn't reach her face. "Please, put the glass down slowly. Don't make it look like you believed me." For one endless second, Adrian Kesh, a man who had buried 3 rivals and walked away from 2 attempts on his own life, chose to trust a maid whose name he didn't know over his own eyes, which told him the wine looked exactly like every other glass of wine he'd ever been served. He set it down. Slowly, casually, as if he'd simply lost interest. And that was the moment the 3 men by the terrace doors, watching for exactly one signal, the sight of Adrian Kesh finishing that glass, realized their plan had failed. What happened next took less time to live through than it does to describe. One of the 3 men reached into his jacket and spoke a single word into a lapel radio. Across the ballroom, high above the dance floor, something inside the housing of that enormous crystal chandelier clicked. A sound too small for anyone to hear over the orchestra. A sound that only mattered because of what came after it. Ivy would later understand that the wine had never been the whole plan. It had been the trigger. If Adrian drank it and collapsed, the resulting chaos, panicked guests, security scrambling toward their boss, would have cleared the dance floor beneath the chandelier just long enough for what came next to look like a tragic accident rather than an assassination. When the poison failed, someone made the call to detonate anyway, rather than let the device be discovered in the morning. "Down, everyone down." Ivy heard herself shouting the words before she'd consciously decided to say them, already grabbing Adrian's sleeve, already hauling him sideways out of his chair with strength she didn't know she had. The chandelier came apart in a burst of white light and a sound that swallowed the orchestra whole, 30 feet of crystal and steel raining down onto the exact spot where 200 masked guests had been dancing 90 seconds earlier, but weren't anymore, because the head table's sudden scramble toward the exits had dragged half the dance floor with it in instinctive panic sympathy. The explosion didn't kill anyone that night. That was the detail no one could quite believe once the smoke cleared and the screaming settled into shocked, ringing silence. 300 guests, $100,000 of crystal, and not a single body beneath it. 19 people were injured by flying glass and falling debris. Nobody died. Investigators would later call it a miracle of timing. Ivy knew it wasn't a miracle. It was 6 whispered words that had moved just enough people, just early enough, to empty a killing floor before it became one. She didn't remember deciding to run. She remembered dust in her lungs, her ears full of a high, flat whine, and Adrian Kesh's hand locked around her wrist, hauling her through a side door into the kitchen corridor while his security team converged on the wreckage behind them, weapons drawn, screaming for the room to be cleared. He didn't let go of her wrist until they were 3 hallways away, in a service stairwell that smelled like bleach and standing water, both of them breathing like they'd run a mile instead of 40 feet. "How?" he said and stopped, because there wasn't a version of that question short enough to finish in one breath. "How did you know?" "I told you. My father." Her voice cracked on the second word and she hated it. Hated that after everything, this was the moment her composure finally slipped. "I have to go. If anyone connects me to this, if anyone even remembers my face standing next to you, they will." He said it flatly, not as a threat, just as a fact he'd already calculated. There were cameras on that table. Whatever cut those men gave that trigger order, whoever they work for is going to review every second of footage from tonight, and they are going to see a maid stop me from drinking that wine 4 seconds before their whole operation collapsed. He studied her with an intensity that made her want to look at the floor, and made her force herself not to. That makes you a target whether you run or not. Running just means you're a target with no protection. Sirens were already threading toward the estate, distant but multiplying. Ivy's mind raced through exits, through routes, through the 2 duffel bags of belongings sitting in a rented room 11 miles away that she could be packing within the hour if she left right now. I can't talk to police, she said. I can't give a statement. My name isn't even the one on my employment paperwork. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Not surprise, she realized. Recognition. As if she'd just confirmed something he'd already half suspected about the too careful, too quiet woman who'd worked in his house for over a year without once slipping up. Then don't talk to them, he said. Come with me instead. She should have run. Every survival instinct she'd built over 2 years screamed at her to run, to disappear down that stairwell and out into the chaos and never look back at Bellamy House or the man standing in it. Instead, for reasons she wouldn't be able to name even days later, she followed him out through a service exit into a night full of sirens, and let him put her in the back of a car that wasn't marked, driven by a man who didn't ask a single question. The safe house, because that was clearly what it was, whatever polite name Adrian gave it, sat on a quiet street in the Garden District, unremarkable from the outside, absurdly secure on the inside. Ivy sat on the edge of a leather sofa at 1 in the morning, still in her ruined uniform, watching Adrian Kesh pour 2 glasses of water because he said dryly, he wasn't touching wine again for a while. I need your real name, he said. Not because I'm going to use it against you. Because if the people who tried to kill me tonight go looking for the maid who stopped it, I need to know exactly who they're going to find when they dig. She almost lied again. It would have been easy. She'd built an entire life on the reflex of it. But he had trusted a stranger's whisper over the evidence of his own eyes, had let a maid he'd never bothered to learn the name of pull him out of his chair in front of his own security detail. That kind of trust, extended once, deserved to be answered honestly. Delphine Marchand, she said. I grew up outside Lafayette. My father was a chemist, a legitimate one, until a man named Reyes Cordero decided he wasn't going to stay that way. She watched Adrian's face for the flicker of recognition and found it immediately, confirming what she'd feared for 2 years, that the name Cordero meant something to men in Adrian's world, that the past she'd been running from and the present she'd just stumbled into weren't as separate as she'd hoped. Cordero's people used my father to cut and seal product for almost 4 years. I grew up watching him do it. 2 years ago he tried to walk away and they killed him for it. I ran because I was the only witness left who could put names to faces, and I've spent every day since then making sure nobody could find me to ask what I saw. And tonight, Adrian said slowly, you recognized a Cordero seal on a bottle of wine at my table. I recognized my father's method. I don't know for certain it was Cordero's people, but whoever taught that wax technique to the man who poisoned that bottle learned it from the same place my father did, or from him directly. She wrapped both hands around the water glass to stop them from shaking. I've spent 2 years terrified that one of Cordero's men would recognize me on the street. Tonight I found out I might be the only person alive who can identify how his operation actually works, the packaging, the transport methods, the people who move for him. That's either the safest piece of leverage I've ever had, or the fastest way to get myself killed. Adrian didn't say anything for a long moment, turning his water glass slowly on the table, working through calculations she couldn't follow. The men who planted that bomb weren't Cordero's usual crew, he finally said. Cordero doesn't blow up ballrooms. Too much attention, too many witnesses, not his style. Someone hired outside talent to make my death look like collateral damage from a party gone wrong. Which means either Cordero's gotten reckless, or someone used his signature method deliberately, to make it look like his work. He looked up at her, and for the first time all night, something almost like respect crossed his face. You didn't just save my life tonight, Delphine. You handed me the first real threat I've had in months toward figuring out who's actually trying to kill me. That's not why I said anything. I know, he said. That's exactly why I believe you. The offer came the next morning, delivered over black coffee in a kitchen that felt too calm for the conversation happening inside it. Adrian needed someone he could trust close to his operation, someone with a chemist's eye for detail, someone who already understood, better than almost anyone he could hire, how men like Cordero packaged, moved, and disguised the things they didn't want found. In exchange, he could give her what she hadn't had in 2 years. A real identity, built to withstand scrutiny, backed by resources that made her old borrowed papers look like a child's drawing. Protection that came from strength instead of invisibility. Or, he said, sliding a folded slip of paper across the table, an amount of cash large enough to make her blink. I give you this, a clean set of documents and a 4-hour head start before anyone connects you to last night. No conditions. You saved my life without being asked. I don't collect debts by cornering people into staying. She sat with the choice longer than she expected to need. 2 years of running had worn a groove into her that made staying anywhere feel like tempting fate. But she was tired of borrowed names, tired of watching every stranger's hands, tired of a life built entirely around not being found. And for the first time since her father died, someone had looked directly at her and treated the thing she knew, the thing that had cost her everything, like it was valuable instead of dangerous. I'll stay, she said. But I want to know exactly what I'm walking into. All of it. No version of the truth that's just easier for me to hear. Adrian nodded slowly, like a man agreeing to terms he respected more for how hard they'd been to negotiate. Then welcome to the part of my life I don't usually let anyone see. The weeks that followed reshaped Ivy No Delphine, she reminded herself, relearning the shape of her own name, into someone she barely recognized in mirrors. New documents arrived within days, seamless enough to survive a federal background check. She moved from the staff quarters into a guest wing of Adrian's actual residence, a converted warehouse loft with security systems that made Bellamy House look casual by comparison. She began sitting in on meetings she once would have been serving drinks at, offering observations about packaging methods and transport patterns that made hardened men twice her age go quiet and start taking notes. She and Adrian developed a working shorthand neither of them commented on out loud. The way he started angling his chair toward the door whenever she entered a room, the way she started noticing which of his men flinched at loud noises and made a private list of who might be compromised. Small things. Habits of two people whose survival instincts had quietly started operating as a single unit instead of two separate ones. 3 weeks after the gala, a black sedan parked across from the loft at 2 in the morning and didn't move for 6 hours. Delphine spotted it from the window, called it in before her conscious mind had even finished processing the threat, and watched Adrian's security team sweep the vehicle at dawn. No explosives. No weapons. Just a message. We know exactly where you sleep. They're not trying to kill you anymore, Delphine said, watching the sedan finally pull away. If they wanted you dead, that car would have been a bomb, not a stakeout. This is a warning. They want you scared, not gone. Cordero doesn't send warnings, Adrian said. Cordero sends results. Then it's not Cordero. The realization landed in her chest like a dropped stone. It's someone using his methods to frame him, to start a war between you and him without either of you knowing you're being played against each other. If you retaliate against Cordero for something he didn't actually order, you do the real enemy's work for them. Adrian went very quiet, the particular quiet of a man recalculating an entire strategy from the ground up. That, he said, is either the most dangerous theory anyone has handed me all year, or it just saved us both from starting a war with the wrong family. It took 11 more days to find the answer, and it came from a detail Delphine hadn't thought mattered until she said it out loud during a late dinner and watched Adrian's fork stop halfway to his mouth. Her father, in the last desperate months before he tried to walk away from Cordero's operation, had once mentioned a name he'd overheard during a shipment handoff, a lieutenant who'd been quietly building his own side arrangements, skimming product, playing both the Cordero and Kesh territories against each other for profit neither family knew about. A man named Reyes Cordero, trusted enough to never be questioned. A man Adrian had met a dozen times and never once suspected. The confrontation happened not in a warehouse or a back alley, but in a lawyer's paneled conference room downtown, both families represented, decades of uneasy peace hanging in the balance while Adrian laid out evidence Delphine had helped assemble piece by piece, shipment logs, a wax seal recipe that matched her father's old technique down to the ratio, A paper trail leading not to Cordero himself but to the lieutenant who'd been playing both families for a fool. Cordero's own representative went pale reading it, understanding immediately how close his family had come to a war they never started and never wanted. "Your man dies for this, or my family goes to war with yours over an attack he ordered without your knowledge," Adrian said, sliding the folder across the table with the same calm precision he'd used on every dangerous conversation Delphine had watched him navigate since the night of the gala. "That's the only version of this where nobody else has to." Cordero's man didn't argue. 3 days later, word came back through channels neither side ever discussed openly that the matter had been handled internally, permanently, and the threat against Adrian Kesh, and against the woman who'd saved his life, no longer existed. Delphine heard the news standing in the loft's kitchen, and felt something in her chest unclench for the first time in over 2 years. A knot she'd carried so long she'd almost forgotten it wasn't just part of her. "It's actually over," she said, needing to hear it confirmed out loud before she'd let herself believe it. "It's over." Adrian crossed the kitchen and stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head to hold his eyes. "You're not hiding anymore, Delphine. You're not running. Whatever you decide to do next, you get to decide it as someone who's actually safe, not someone managing how well she's hidden." The freedom in that sentence should have felt like an ending. Instead, standing in a kitchen that had slowly, without either of them quite naming it, become something like home, it felt like the very first page of something neither of them had planned but both of them wanted. "What if I want to stay?" she said. "Not because I owe you. Not because I'm scared of what's out there. Because this house, this life is the first place in 2 years that's felt like mine instead of borrowed." Adrian's answer wasn't a speech. It was his hand finding hers across the counter, steady in a way that told her everything his words hadn't yet caught up to. "Then stay," he said. "Not as someone I'm protecting. As someone who belongs here." 6 months later, Delphine Marchand stood in the reopened Bellamy House ballroom, rebuilt, rechandeliered, the scorch marks in the old floor sanded away and replaced with new hardwood that still smelled faintly of varnish, wearing her actual name on a discreet badge clipped to a blazer instead of a uniform. She wasn't pouring wine anymore. She ran security review for every event the family hosted, the woman with the sharpest eyes in the building, and nobody who shook her hand at the door had any idea she'd once been invisible enough to save all their lives without a single one of them noticing her do it. Adrian found her near the new chandelier during the evening's final toast, 2 glasses of wine in hand, a habit they'd rebuilt slowly, deliberately, checking every seal together before either of them drank a drop, a small ritual that had become its own private joke between them. "Any threats to report tonight?" he asked, handing her a glass. "Just one." She checked the wax seal out of habit older than either of them wanted to admit, then let herself smile. "Table 12's been asking if we do weddings." "Do we?" "I hear there's demand for it," she said, and watched something warm and unguarded cross his face, the same look she'd caught once in a stairwell that smelled like bleach, on the night everything had changed. They touched glasses, the sound small and clear over the hum of an orchestra playing a room full of people who would never know how close it had come to being a headline instead of a party. 2 years of running had ended with a single whisper. And on the other side of that whisper, Delphine Marchand had finally found the one thing running had never given her: a place and a person worth staying for. Thank you for watching until the very end. If this story kept you hooked, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. And if you want more stories like Delphine and Adrian's, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling stories like this one. What part of their story hit you the hardest? Tell me below.